And we are recording. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome Reverend Paul Johnson, who is our quarter-time minister. He holds the Doctorate of Ministry and Divinity degrees from Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. And he serves several U congregations in several states, including ours right here in Brevard. And we appreciate you being here. Paul Johnson will speak Scrooge from Humbug to Hallelujah. Reverend Johnson, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much, Beth. I'm pleased to be with you all on this Sunday before Christmas. And I'm looking forward to our Christmas Eve service at 5 o'clock. We'll have a homily that I'll present, a mini sermon, so to speak, where I'm going to tell you the greatest miracle, true story of Christmas that I've ever come across. And I have 4 others who will be taking part with me on the 4 candles of Christmas, and we'll have wonderful music. So please join us on Christmas Eve. And then, of course, I'm looking forward to our New Year's Day gathering. Everyone encouraged to BYOB, a snack to share. And then on January 2nd, I'll be speaking on happiness in the new year. We wish each other happiness in the new year, and I'm going to do a sermon on what's involved in happiness. But 1843 was a difficult year for 32-year-old Charles Dickens. His works weren't selling the way he had hoped. He was in deep financial difficulty. He had a large family, which was due to get larger after the first of the year. His sister-in-law lived with the family as well as his indigent family. So he was in real difficulty. He had joined a Unitarian church, the little Portland church, the year before, after becoming friends with their minister, Edward Taggart. He was pleased with the broad perspective of Unitarianism and its commitment to social justice. He was appalled at the plight of the poor, particularly at the lack of opportunity for education. And the one time he ever visited with the Queen, this is what he raised with her as his primary concern, and he was very supportive of the ragged school movement for free public education. But he feared poverty because his father had to go to debtor's prison for 2 different times. The first time, the whole family went with him, and Charles was allowed to go out and work in a factory to earn money toward what his father owed. But he feared that his family was going to sink into this sort of poverty. So he was desperate when an idea came to him for a new work. And this occurred to him while he was on the train towards Manchester, where he was going to speak at the Manchester Athenaeum, which was committed to the education of the poor. And he became more and more excited about this story that developed in his mind. And he walked the darkened streets of London many, many evenings. His sister-in-law wrote that he wept and he laughed and wept again and excited himself in the most extraordinary manner as he wrote this over the course of 6 weeks. He finished it in time for it to be available to the public on December 19th. And all 6,000 copies were sold the first day. And it had been sort of such a luxurious printing of it that the cost was the equivalent of $30 a copy for us today. And of course, very soon, pirate editions were available for $1. But it became, of course, a runaway bestseller and has remained so ever since. And I've read it a number of times and I've seen the play. In fact, Carol and I just saw it a couple of weeks ago at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Their excellent production, which never ceases to amaze and inspire me. So every time I review the story, I learn something new. So I'm going to do a little review for you and then tell you about some of the implications, particularly for Unitarian Universalists, of this wonderful story. But he presents Scrooge to us as a grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner as he sat in his counting house on the day of Christmas Eve. And we see a delegation come and ask him for a contribution for the poor, for shelter and food and fuel. And he says, bah, humbug, to their request, saying, I've given through my taxes. Are there not workhouses? Are there not treadmills? Are there not poorhouses? Are there not prisons? I'll not give another farthing. Well, much abashed, they leave. And then his nephew Fred comes in and invites him to come to Christmas the next day. Fred is his only living relative, son of his dear sister Fan, but he refuses the invitation to come to Christmas dinner. He responds, bah, humbug to that as well, saying Christmas is a hoax. Bob Cratchit, his assistant, huddles for warmth in the office, and he's assured rather grudgingly that he can have Christmas Day off by Scrooge, but he tells him that this is like picking his pocket every December 25th. And he says to Cratchit, you had better be here bright and early the morning after Christmas. Well, Scrooge leaves his office, goes to his tavern, has a solitary meal. And after that, he looks over some of his ledger accounts and then goes home, goes to his room, double locks the door, gets ready for bed, sits down, and then rather disgustingly to me, eats a plate of gruel and then sits back in his chair. And then he hears a tremendous clanging coming from the cellar, up the stairs and through the door. It's the ghost of his partner, Marley, who had died 7 years earlier, who is bound in chains and ledger books and padlocks, those things in his life that had bogged him down in his money-making pursuits. But he says to Scrooge that he wants him to avoid this punishment that he is suffering, and so he's going to send him 3 spirits. Well, Scrooge doesn't believe all this, thinking this ghost business comes from indigestion. But then Marley lets out such a scream that Scrooge goes down on his knees and says, okay, all right already. So the 3 spirits come. Christmas past brings him back to his childhood, and we see a solitary Scrooge, a very sort of dispirited Scrooge, who's left at school when everyone else has gone home to be with their families. He's there all alone reading Alibaba and Robinson Crusoe stories. Another Christmas past, his sister Fan comes to fetch him, saying, Father is so much in a better mood, so come home. And there's a Christmas when he was an apprentice, and Fezziwig, his employer, had thrown a party, and there was feasting and dancing and great enjoyment. And he realized how generous Fezziwig had been, and he was a bit chagrined at how he had been treating Bob Cratchit. And then another Christmas is shown him. Belle, his beautiful fiancée, is saying she is breaking off their engagement because he has become too totally involved with money and had put off their marriage until they could have more financial security. And she said, finally, I've had enough of it. I'm calling off the engagement. And then there's that scene from a few years later where she's married and has several children, and her husband comes in. They gather around him, and he says he had just been to Scrooge's office and learned that his partner Marley was dying. But then comes the ghost of Christmas present. He goes to the home of Bob Cratchit, where he is considered around the Christmas table as an ogre, even though Bob Cratchit called him the founder of the feast because he was paying for it, providing money for it, but the rest of the family isn't buying it. Then there is Tiny Tim, who's suffering from a kidney disease, and his life is in jeopardy, and Scrooge's heart is touched. And he asked the spirit, will Tiny Tim live? He had told the solicitors the day before, so what if the poor die? It will reduce the surplus population. So the spirit quotes those dreadful Malthusian words back to him, and he's abashed by his own words. And then Scrooge is brought to his nephew Fred's home, where there is a festive celebration, and he is a figure of derision, with Fred saying, Uncle Scrooge, with all of his money, what has it got him? He's home all alone. He's living a dismal existence, but we are going to wish him a Merry Christmas anyway. And then the spirit of Christmas present opens his robe, and there are 2 emaciated children unveiled, a boy and a girl. Scrooge is taken back, and the steward, or the spirit says, they are suffering, one called ignorance and the other want, because of the neglect of humankind. It's not divinely ordained, but it's a human will that's involved here. His conscience is pricked, and he says, is there no hope for them? And he's given back his words from the day before. Are there not workhouses? Are there not poorhouses? Are there not prisons? And then the spirit of Christmas future brings him to his own death. He's mourned by no one. In fact, thieves ransacked his home for all of his goods. And those that will have their debt assigned to someone else celebrate. They declare that no one else could be as bad a creditor as Mr. Scrooge. He still doesn't know for sure if the body on the bed is his. He can't bring himself to pull the covers back to see if it is him. But then the spirit brings him back to the cemetery, and he sees the tombstone that says Ebenezer Scrooge. He says words to this effect, "Oh, Spirit, I will keep Christmas properly. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. I will share with those in need." Well, he awakes and finds out that it's Christmas morning. He gives a young boy money to buy a plump turkey for the Cratchit household. He goes out into the street, and he's a changed man. He looks with interest at what is going on in the shops and among the people, and he goes to his nephew Fred's house, and he goes back and forth in front of that house 12 times before deciding he's going to go in. And then he enjoyed a wonderful Christmas day with Fred and his family. The next morning, Bob Cratchit was late to work, and Scrooge was there keeping track of the time. Bob hurried in and was terribly apologetic, but Scrooge said, "What am I going to do with you? I'm going to have to increase your salary. And this very day, we are going to discuss your family's finances and Tiny Tim's health over Christmas at a drink at a nearby tap." Well, you could have bowled Bob Cratchit over. But it's said that Scrooge kept his word. He kept Christmas as well as any. He was a new man. And we are told that Tiny Tim did not die. I was interested to learn that that was added at the printer's shop at the last minute, but I'm glad that it was. So that's the story. It has become the most famous of all Dickens stories, perhaps the most famous of all Christmas stories that's read and played over and over again. Well, what does it mean to us, particularly as Unitarian Universalists this Sunday before Christmas? Well, first of all, I'm happy that he presented us with a wonderful version of Unitarian Universalist conversion or salvation. There is nothing in the story about the virgin birth or total human depravity or the Holy Trinity or about substitutionary atonement. He claimed the Christmas message is very importantly about the life and the teaching of Jesus and not the doctrines that have grown up around him or the legends that have grown up around Christmas. It's a story about the possibility of change for the better in the human heart. Now, I've known some UUs over the years who have said bah humbug to Christmas because they don't believe the legends behind it. Chris Rabel, a UU minister, once wrote a song, tongue-in-cheek, in his book, Hymns for the Celebration of Strife, which goes like this, to the tune of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. God rest ye Unitarians, let nothing you dismay. Remember, there's no evidence there was a Christmas day. When Christ was born is just not known, no matter what they say. Oh, tidings of reason and fact, glad tidings of reason and fact. There was no star of Bethlehem, there was no angel song. There could have been no wise men, for the journey was too long. The stories in the Bible are historically wrong. O tidings of reason and fact, glad tidings of reason and fact. Now, unfortunately, there are not too many Unitarians of that reason and fact stripe when it comes to Christmas. You know, I wondered when I became a Unitarian Universalist many years ago if I could continue to celebrate Christmas because I no longer believed in Jesus as being God incarnate. And I found that you celebrate Christmas with abandon, not only because of the teachings of Jesus, which are in accord with our purposes and principles, but because we even believe in the celebrative nature of the pagan celebrations which preceded the Christian celebrations. So I've been a very much of a Christmas enthusiast, as have so many other UUs over the years. But Dickens takes us away from all of these difficulties when he claims that the important thing of the story of Jesus is what he taught about the ways in which we should treat each other. And of course, Unitarian Universalists generally believe that conversion or spiritual awakening is not a one and done thing. It's something that is an ongoing process. And I think Christmas time is a good time for this ongoing process. I've often said, and I think I wrote in one of our newsletter articles, that I think of each year as a voyage around the sun. And this time of year, we are in port after that long voyage of a year. And I think it's a time for spiritual pondering as we look at Christmas's past, present, and future before we begin another journey. It's a time of spiritual discernment. And Dickens, in his genius, can help us with that. I think particularly of a Christmas past, which is meaningful to me in terms of his encouragement for us to be generous with those who are less fortunate than we are. When I was 8 years old, for the first time, my father took me with him on his Christmas visits to the poor of our community in Ludington, Michigan. The Women's Alliance and the church had put together these Christmas baskets of food for the poor. Now, these were not baskets of, Christmas niceties, like fruitcakes or something like that. These were stern, canned goods of food and staples in large bushel baskets. And in fact, I was kind of surprised my dad with a bad back was carrying these big bushel baskets into these homes. But it was the first time I'd ever been to the homes of desperately poor people. There were no Christmas trees. There were no presents under the trees. In some of the cases, there was no indoor toilet. And I remember the last place we visited was so forlorn, and the people were so happy for that food. And then we left that poor home to our home for a Christmas feast that my grandmother and mother had been preparing for several days, with all of the Norwegian and Swedish delicacies. There was a beautiful tree. My mother had even constructed a fireplace for us. She had carpentry skills so that we could hang our stockings. And there were gifts from aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers and parents, just in profusion under that tree for kids. And that difference between the poor and even our family, which wasn't that affluent, has stuck with me all these years as being so basically unfair, so basically sad. And of course, when we look in a macro view of where we stand as a nation with the rest of the developed world, we should be ashamed when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to family leave, when it comes to early childhood education. And we have this Christmas hope, at least I have it. I don't know if everyone has it, but I have it, that with this Build Back Better plan, we're going to be doing something positive about all of these areas in which we lag the rest of the world. One of my favorite scenes in the Christmas Carol is the Christmas party at which Fezziwig is providing such a wonderful party and a feast for his employees. And the Scrooge says these words or something to the effect. He says, as Fezziwig did, we have the power to do so as well. We have the power to make the days of others light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Our power lies in words or looks and things so small that it is impossible to add and count them up. The happiness we give is no small matter. A good word is worth a fortune. Let no idol displace love, even a golden one. May that be our goal and our motto this Christmas season. So may it be. Amen.